The city of Rome breathed in silence that night, a silence too heavy for comfort. Beneath the marbled grandeur and the golden torches of the Forum, shadows stretched longer than they should have. And even the winds seemed to move with caution, as if the air itself feared what was coming. The stars hung above the city like witnesses, cold and distant, while the Tiber moved with a murmur of something ancient, something that had seen countless rises and countless falls. Rome was at its height, powerful, radiant, and untouchable, but in the silence of that night, it trembled like a wounded beast. Julius Caesar slept uneasily. Even in the quiet of his palace, dreams pursued him, dark, fevered visions of blood and betrayal. He had conquered Gaul, crushed Pompey, and claimed the title of dictator for life. Yet, in the stillness of that night, the conqueror who had bent nations to his will could not escape a haunting feeling that he had gone too far, that even gods envied the power he now held. The marble walls of his chamber glistened faintly in the moonlight, and his breath came shallow, almost cautious, as though he feared to wake something lurking in the darkness beside him. Far across the city, a priest woke in terror. He had dreamt of fire raining from the sky, of a great lion wandering through the capital, and of men crying out in agony as their shadows vanished in the midday sun. He rushed to his shrine, trembling, offering sacrifice after sacrifice. But each time, the omens refused him. The gods were silent, and silence, in Rome, was the most dreadful answer of all. By dawn, rumors of unnatural signs spread like wildfire. Horses refusing to eat, statues weeping, crimson and lightning striking the temples of the divine. The people whispered the same words under their breath. The Ides are coming. Caesar's wife, Calpurnia, had not slept either. Her dreams had been filled with images of her husband's body, pale, cold, covered in wounds, and of the Senate echoing with cries of horror. She woke trembling, her pulse racing, as though her heart already knew the truth. She found Caesar standing by the window, watching the dawn rise over the city he ruled. His expression was unreadable, a mixture of exhaustion and something more, the quiet pride of a man who had risen too high to turn back. "Don't go to the Senate today," she whispered, her voice breaking. "Something terrible waits for you there." "I saw it! Your blood! Your cloak torn! Your friends turning against you!" He smiled faintly, the kind of smile that hides fear behind reason. "Calpurnia," he said softly, "the gods speak in riddles. But I am Caesar. Rome does not bend to omens. Rome bends to will." She clutched his arm, desperate. Even the strongest will cannot stop fate. But fate had already begun its quiet march toward him. The morning sun rose over the Forum, and with it came the murmur of the city awakening, merchants opening stalls, senators preparing their togas, soldiers sharpening blades that gleamed like mirrors. Yet there was an unease beneath it all, an invisible tremor that seemed to rattle through every street. Something was wrong, though no one dared name it. In the Senate, the conspirators gathered one by one. Cassius arrived first, his eyes hollow, his mind restless. He was a man consumed by jealousy, poisoned by the idea that Caesar's glory had eclipsed his own. Brutus came next, reluctant, thoughtful, the face of reason masking guilt. He told himself it was for the Republic, that Caesar's death would save Rome from tyranny. But deep down, he knew it was a lie, he repeated, only to silence the storm in his heart. There were others, Casca, Trebonius, Decimus, each driven by fear, envy, or duty. They spoke in whispers, their words sharp as daggers. "Tomorrow," Cassius said, voice trembling, "he will sit among us again, wearing the crown in all but name. If we do not act now, we never will." Brutus stared at the marble floor, his hands cold. "And if we act," he murmured, "Rome may bleed forever." Cassius leaned forward, eyes burning with quiet madness. "Better Rome's blood than her chains." A silence followed, long, suffocating, irreversible. One by one, they nodded. The choice was made. As the conspirators departed, Rome felt the faintest shift in the wind. A dog began to howl somewhere near the Capitol. The sound rose and carried through the alleys, through the columns and courtyards, like a warning too late to be heard. That night, Caesar dined with friends. The air was thick with laughter and wine. Yet beneath the surface, tension coiled like a serpent. Men raised cups in his honor, calling him immortal, divine, eternal. But when Caesar's eyes met Brutus's across the table, something in the air went still. For a moment, neither spoke. Two men bound by history, love, and an invisible doom. Later, as the guests departed and the torches burned low, Caesar stood alone in the courtyard. He could feel the cool night pressing against his skin, the same strange unease whispering through his veins. From somewhere beyond the walls, he thought he heard faint voices, too distant to understand, too haunting to ignore. He turned his gaze toward the stars. The Ides of March were upon him. The city slept, but the gods did not. High above Rome, thunder rolled, though the sky was clear. The earth gave a low tremor, like a beast turning in its sleep. And in that silent moment, as the flames of the torches flickered and died, Caesar whispered to himself the words that no conqueror had ever dared to say aloud. Perhaps even I am mortal after all. The dawn broke with a strange stillness over Rome. The sky, pale and colorless, hung heavy above the rooftops, as though it too sensed the weight of what was to come. Even the birds seemed hesitant to sing, their songs replaced by the low murmurs of the waking city. The streets glistened faintly from the night's dew, and in the distance, the first horns of the Forum echoed across the marble colonnade. But beneath that ordinary hum of life, something darker stirred, an invisible tension that seeped into every breath, every glance, every heartbeat. Brutus sat alone in his chamber, the morning light cutting through the window in thin, sharp lines. Before him lay a letter, folded neatly, sealed in red wax. His hands trembled as he turned it over. He didn't need to break the seal. He knew the handwriting too well. Another anonymous plea slipped under his door during the night, urging him to act, to restore the Republic, to save Rome from Caesar's tyranny. But the words felt heavier now, like the voice of something not entirely mortal whispering through the ink. He closed his eyes and tried to remember the days when Caesar had been like a father to him. The laughter, the campaigns, the triumphs. But memory itself felt tainted now, poisoned by fear and guilt. Outside, Cassius was already waiting, his cloak drawn tightly around him. His expression was carved from stone. "The gods have spoken," he said when Brutus joined him. "The omens are clear. The Senate meets today. It must be done before the sun sets." Brutus looked toward the Capitol rising in the distance. "If we spill his blood in that sacred place," he murmured, "will Rome be cleansed or forever cursed?" Cassius's reply was sharp. "Rome is already cursed." Brutus, Caesar, only made it visible. They walked together through the twisting alleys, past vendors shouting half-heartedly, past slaves sweeping marble steps that gleamed like bone. Each sound, each face, felt unreal, as though the city itself were holding its breath. They passed the statue of Pompey, once Caesar's rival, now a silent guardian of the Senate steps. Cassius paused there for a moment, running his fingers along the cold stone surface. "Here," he whispered, "Rome will find her freedom again." The conspirators gathered in secret one final time. The air was thick with the scent of oil lamps and the faint tremor of nerves. Casca leaned against the wall, muttering a prayer under his breath. Decimus checked the dagger hidden beneath his robe, the blade polished until it caught even the faintest light. Trebonius spoke softly of escape routes, of timing, of how many guards Caesar might bring. But their words seemed hollow, drowned by the weight of what they were about to unleash. Brutus stood apart, his eyes fixed on the flicker of the flame before him. It danced as though alive, its movement unpredictable, its glow both beautiful and cruel. He saw his reflection in it, distorted, trembling, uncertain. Cassius approached him, his voice low. "Once the deed is done, the people will praise you. They love you more than any man in Rome. You are their symbol of virtue. With you, our act becomes justice. Without you, it is murder." Brutus didn't answer. The flame bent under a draft of unseen wind, almost extinguishing. Meanwhile, in Caesar's home, Calpurnia was weeping. The night had brought her no peace. In her dream, she had seen the Capitol drenched in blood, Caesar's statue spouting crimson from its base, and crowds running in terror. When she woke, her hands were shaking, her skin slick with sweat. She begged her husband once more not to go to the Senate. "Stay, my love," she pleaded. "You have nothing to prove today."
"Let the Senate wait."
Caesar looked at her with quiet affection, then turned toward the door where his attendants waited. "Cowards die many times before their deaths," he said softly. "The valiant never tastes of death but once." Her tears fell faster. "And yet, even the valiant can be betrayed." He paused, only for a moment, then smiled that same tired smile, the one that hid every shadow inside him. "If fate demands my blood, Calpurnia, then let Rome drink deeply." As he stepped outside, the city seemed to shift. The light dimmed, though the sun still burned behind thin clouds. People bowed as he passed, murmuring blessings, hailing him as but in the corners of the streets, eyes watched from the dark eyes that did not blink, eyes that followed his every movement with silent calculation. At the same time, a soothsayer stood in the crowd, his face half hidden by a hood. His voice trembled as he called out, "Beware the Ides of March!" The crowd stood, uneasy laughter rising, but Caesar only raised an eyebrow, amused. "The Ides have come," he said. The soothsayer's reply was quiet, almost drowned by the sound of sandals scraping marble. "I, Caesar, but not gone." Inside the Senate House, the conspirators moved like actors rehearsing a final act. Their faces were masks of calm, but their hands betrayed them, twitching, sweating, restless. The room smelled of incense and iron. Each senator who entered greeted Caesar with words of loyalty, but their eyes told another story. Cassius's pulse raced. Casca's mouth was dry. Brutus could barely breathe. Decimus approached Caesar first, offering flattery to distract him. Trebonius led Antony away in polite conversation, ensuring he would not interfere. One by one, the circle tightened. Caesar took his seat on the marble throne. For a moment, the world seemed to pause, the air thick, time frozen. His gaze swept across the chamber, and in that instant, he felt something shift inside him. The faces before him blurred, their smiles too perfect, their movements too measured. Somewhere deep within, a whisper echoed, "They are not your friends today." But before he could speak, a senator approached with a petition, a plea to restore his exiled brother. Caesar waved him off impatiently. "That matter's closed." Another stepped forward, insisting, pressing closer. Hands touched his robe. The voices rose. Caesar frowned, irritation flaring into anger. And then, in the confusion, Casca struck first. The blade flashed in the dim light, cutting across Caesar's shoulder. For a heartbeat, the world held its breath. Caesar turned sharply, eyes wide, disbelief freezing his face. "Casca! What is this?" But Casca had no words, only trembling fury. Another blade followed, then another. Cassius lunged forward. Decimus joined. Metal tore through silk and flesh. The marble floor darkened with drops of red. Caesar staggered backward, trying to fend off the blows, but there were too many. He caught Brutus's eyes through the chaos, and in that single look, everything changed. The air seemed to vanish. The sounds of the room drowned in the silence between them. E2, Brute? It wasn't a question! It was recognition. The quiet understanding that everything he had built, every triumph, every friendship, every dream of Rome's greatness, had led here. Brutus hesitated only a moment before driving his blade into Caesar's chest. The strength left his hands. The world dimmed. He fell against the foot of Pompey's statue, the marble his final witness. The conspirators stood over him, panting, trembling, their daggers slick with blood. For a moment, they said nothing. The silence was deafening. Outside, the people of Rome went about their day, unaware that their ruler, their god, their conqueror, their tyrant, lay dead in the Senate House. But the wind carried a strange sound through the streets, like distant thunder or the cry of a dying empire. Brutus wiped his blade and whispered, almost to himself, "Rome is free." But no one answered. Not the gods, not the earth, not even the air around him. In that moment, Rome held her breath again, and something ancient and unseen began to awaken. Rome had never been so quiet. The city that once thundered with the cries of triumph and conquest now held its breath beneath a shroud of disbelief. The marble walls of the Senate still echoed faintly with the sound of Caesar's final breath, though the body had long since grown cold. The air carried a metallic scent, the ghost of blood that no incense could disguise. Outside, the people gathered in uneasy silence, unsure whether to rejoice or to mourn. The man who had ruled the world lay dead by the hands of those who claimed to love him. In the streets, whispers moved like smoke. Caesar is dead. The tyrant has fallen. The republic is saved. But for every whisper of freedom, another voice answered. What have they done? The gods will curse us. This blood will not rest. Brutus stood over the lifeless body, staring down at what they had wrought. His hands, once steady with reason, were shaking uncontrollably. Around him, the conspirators murmured prayers, their eyes wide and hollow. Cassius was pacing like a caged wolf, his breath ragged. "It's done!" he whispered to himself. "It's done." But his tone carried no triumph, only disbelief. The others wiped their blades, but no amount of cleansing could wash away the stain that had already marked them forever. Brutus knelt beside Caesar's corpse, pressing a trembling hand to the blood-soaked toga. "You were too great," he murmured. "Even your fall shakes the heavens." He looked up at the statue of Pompey looming over them, the marble now spattered with red. "Forgive me, Caesar," he said softly. "Forgive us all." Outside, the first screams began. A servant, stumbling upon the body, ran into the street, shouting the news. Within minutes, chaos erupted. The crowd surged, confused and horrified. Some shouted praise for the conspirators, others called for vengeance. Mothers clutched their children. Old men wept openly in the square. Rome trembled, torn between love and fear. Mark Antony was not there when Caesar fell. Trebonius had cleverly lured him away, fearing his temper and his loyalty. But when he returned and saw the blood smeared across the Senate floor, the truth struck him like lightning. His knees weakened. For a moment, he could not move. Then, rage, hot, uncontainable, rose like fire through his chest. "You fools," he hissed. "You think Rome will thank you for this?" He looked down at Caesar's broken form, his face pale but still noble, even in death. "I swear," Antony whispered, "you will be avenged." Meanwhile, Brutus tried to calm the mob. He stepped out into the forum, his toga still stained with Caesar's blood, and raised his voice to the crowd. "Romans!" he called. "People of Rome! Hear me!" The noise quieted, thousands of eyes turning toward him. His voice trembled at first, then grew stronger, more deliberate. "I loved Caesar. None loved him more, but I loved Rome more. I struck him not because I hated him, but because I loved freedom." The words fell like stones into a restless sea. Some nodded, others spat. Cassius joined him, trying to bolster the illusion of order, but the people were divided, their hearts split as sharply as Caesar's flesh. That night, thunder rolled over the city, though the sky remained cloudless. The conspirators met again, their faces pale, their eyes hollow from sleeplessness. Cassius drank heavily, his laughter brittle. "We are heroes now," he said bitterly, "heroes drenched in glory and fear." Brutus sat apart, silent, his thoughts a storm he could not escape. "We freed Rome," he murmured, though the words tasted like ashes. "Then why does she look at us as if we've murdered a god?" A slave entered quietly, bearing news. Antony had taken Caesar's body. He was preparing a funeral, a public one. Cassius slammed his cup down, fury lighting his eyes. "He means to turn the people against us!" "Brutus, we cannot allow it." Brutus's answer came slow, weary. "Let him speak. We are not tyrants. We are patriots. If our cause is just, the truth will defend itself." Cassius's jaw tightened. "The truth. The people care not for truth. They care for fire, for blood, for spectacle. And Antony will give them all three. And indeed, Antony prepared exactly that. 2 days later, the forum overflowed with citizens. The air was thick with incense, smoke, and anticipation. Caesar's body lay upon a golden bier, covered in purple robes and laurel wreaths. The sun glared fiercely upon the square, turning the scene into a blaze of gold and crimson. Mark Antony stepped forward. His face was calm, but his eyes burned with restrained fury. When he spoke, his voice was slow, measured, almost mournful. "Friends! Romans! Countrymen! Lend me your ears!" The crowd fell silent. Each word dripped like honey and venom. Antony praised Brutus and the conspirators as honorable men, his tone mocking but subtle, weaving admiration into accusation. He spoke of Caesar's kindness, his generosity, his refusal of the crown. He lifted the blood-stained cloak, its tears visible, its stains still wet. "This was the mantle I remember," he said, his voice trembling. "Look! In this place ran Cassius's dagger. See what a renty envious Casca made." Through this wound, Brutus stabbed, and as he plucked his cursed steel away, mark how Caesar's blood followed it. A collective gasp rippled through the crowd. Antony paused, then leaned forward, lowering his voice to a whisper. "You all loved him once, not without cause. What cause withholds you now to mourn for him? It was not a speech, it was a spell." The crowd, once uncertain, now burned with grief and rage. Some wept openly. Others shouted curses toward the Senate. When Antony revealed Caesar's will, the inheritance left to every Roman citizen, the forum erupted into chaos. "He loved you," Antony cried. "He left you his gardens, his gold, his glory. And how repaid you him? With daggers?" The mob surged forward. Torches were raised. Statues were toppled. The air filled with screams and the smell of smoke. The conspirators barely escaped the forum alive. Brutus's heart broke as he saw the crowd tear apart the benches of the Senate to build Caesar's funeral pyre. Flames roared high, licking the sky as though devouring the heavens themselves. Cassius pulled Brutus into an alley as the mob thundered by. "You see now?" he spat. "This is your justice. This is your republic." Brutus stared at the inferno. "We killed a man," he said quietly. "And in doing so, we may have killed Rome." The next day, the ashes of Caesar's pyre still smoldered when Antony met with Octavian, Caesar's adopted heir. The young man was calm, calculating, his eyes cold with purpose. "Here's my father in all but blood," Octavian said, "and his killers will learn that Rome remembers her dead." Antony saw in him not a boy, but something dangerous, a reflection of Caesar's ambition reborn in a quieter form. Together, they began to plan. Meanwhile, Brutus and Cassius fled the city. Rome was no longer theirs. The people who had once cheered their names now cursed them in the streets. Statues of Brutus were torn down. Cassius's home was looted. Across the empire, provinces wavered, waiting to see who would claim the ashes of power. That night, as they camped outside the city, Brutus dreamed of Caesar. The dream was vivid, the Senate hall bathed in shadow, Caesar standing over him, his wounds still bleeding. "You, too, Brutus," he whispered again, his tone neither angry nor kind, only tired. Brutus awoke, drenched in sweat, his pulse racing, the night air cold as steel. Cassius stirred beside the dying fire. "Another dream?" he asked. Brutus nodded. "He does not rest." Cassius looked into the flames. "Nor will we, until Rome is ours again, or we are ashes beside him." But Brutus said nothing. Deep down, he knew there would be no peace. Not for them, not for Rome, not for the world that had once followed Caesar's banner. As dawn broke, a crimson haze spread across the horizon, painting the sky with the color of blood. The wind carried the faint sound of distant drums, the rhythm of armies gathering, of vengeance awakening. The Ides had passed, but the storm had only begun. The ashes of the funeral pyre had long cooled, but Rome still burned. Not in flame, but in spirit, in vengeance, in rage, in the silent terror that followed every whisper of Caesar's name. The streets were haunted by his memory. The Forum, once filled with triumph, now echoed with division and unrest. Men spoke his name with reverence or hatred, but none dared to forget it. For though his body was gone, his shadow ruled the city still. Mark Antony and Octavian stood side by side atop the Capitoline Hill, overlooking the vast sprawl of Rome. Below them, banners bearing Caesar's likeness flooded in the wind. Not a man now, but a god reborn through fire and grief. "He is more powerful in death than he ever was in life," Antony murmured. Octavian's expression was unreadable. His youth belied a coldness that unsettled even seasoned men. "Then we will use his ghost to destroy those who killed him," he said calmly. "And when they are gone, Rome will remember who avenged him." Antony turned his gaze toward the horizon. "You sound like him already." Across the sea, Brutus and Cassius moved like exiles through their own world, hunted, weary, and burdened by the weight of what they had done. They had fled east, gathering forces from the provinces still loyal to the old republic. In public, they spoke of restoring freedom. In private, they spoke little at all. The nights were long, filled with the sounds of restless horses and distant storms. Brutus often walked alone at dusk, his thoughts circling like vultures. He could feel it. The guilt gnawing through him. The ghost he could neither name nor silence. Some nights he thought he saw Caesar's figure among the shadows, following him just beyond the torchlight. Each time, he turned and nothing was there. Cassius watched his friend with growing unease. "You're haunted," he said one evening, his tone sharp but weary. Brutus's answer came slow, hollow. "We killed a man who believed himself eternal." Perhaps he was right. The army they built was vast, disciplined, and desperate. Tens of thousands gathered beneath their banners, men who believed they fought for the Republic's last breath. But in Rome, Antony and Octavian were forging something even greater, a union of necessity, not trust. The second triumvirate, they called it, though its heart was vengeance. They divided the empire like scavengers dividing a carcass, then turned their eyes toward the east. Antony's legions marched first, their banners glinting in the sunlight like rivers of gold. Octavian followed, cold and methodical, his mind already shaping the empire to come. In every city they passed, they proclaimed Caesar's name. They carried his death mask through the streets, demanded offerings at his altars, and promised retribution for his murder. The people cheered, not for them, but for the god they claimed to serve. By the time Antony's fleet reached the coast of Greece, the sky itself seemed to darken. The sea churned violently, as if stirred by unseen hands. Sailors whispered that the gods were restless, that Caesar's spirit walked the waves, leading the avengers toward his killers. In their camp at Philippi, Brutus and Cassius awaited them. The air there was heavy with tension, not the tension of men preparing for war, but of men waiting for fate. The plains stretched wide and empty beneath a gray sky, and every night lightning flickered along the horizon. On the eve of battle, Brutus sat alone in his tent, the candlelight trembling. He was reading by habit, though the words no longer reached him. A gust of wind blew through the tent, extinguishing the flame. The air turned cold, unnaturally so. When he looked up, a shape was standing before him, silent, massive, shrouded in pale light. Brutus froze. The voice that followed was neither loud nor soft. It simply was, filling the space around him like the whisper of eternity. "I am your evil spirit, Brutus," it said. The face was unmistakable. Wounds glistened faintly on the chest, eyes calm and distant as marble Shiza. Brutus s breath caught. "Why have you come?" The apparition's gaze did not waver. "To tell you, we shall meet again at Philippi." And then it was gone. When the candle reignited, Brutus was alone once more. He sat motionless, his hands trembling, the echo of those words ringing in his mind. Cassius entered moments later and saw the pallor on his face. "What have you seen?" "Not what?" Brutus whispered. "Who?" The morning came, gray and lifeless. The two armies faced each other across the plains, Antony and Octavian on one side, Brutus and Cassius on the other. Trumpets blared, shields clashed. The ground trembled beneath the weight of destiny. The first charge broke like a storm. Cassius fought fiercely, his blade flashing through the chaos, but the field was confusion, dust, blood, and cries of men swallowed by the roar of battle. His messengers vanished. His signals went unanswered. When he saw his flank crumble beneath Antony's assault, despair gripped him. He withdrew to a nearby hill to watch the field, believing his army destroyed. "This is fate!" he muttered bitterly. "This is what the gods have decreed." His servant Pindarus stood beside him, pale with fear. "Do as I command," Cassius said. "Take this sword, the same that struck Caesar, and drive it through me!" The servant hesitated, but Cassius's eyes burned with final resolve. "Do it!" When the blade entered his chest, Cassius fell with a sigh. Neither triumph nor terror, only release. His last sight was the sky above Philippi, streaked with fire and cloud, as if Rome itself wept for him. Brutus did not learn of Cassius's death until hours later. When the news reached him, he closed his eyes and whispered, "Caesar, you are mighty yet." The battle raged on for 2 more days. Brutus's forces, brave but broken, began to falter. Men deserted. Standards fell. The dream of the Republic bled into the soil. When at last his lines collapsed completely, Brutus fled to the hills with a handful of loyal men. The night was cold, the air heavy with smoke. He sat upon a rock overlooking the field where so many had died for ideals that no longer meant anything. "My hour is come," he said softly. His companions begged him to flee, to wait, to live, but he only smiled sadly. "No," he said, "Caesar's ghost awaits me. I must keep my word." He took his sword, the same blade that had struck Caesar, and handed it to a trusted friend. "Hold it firm," he said. Then, closing his eyes, he threw himself upon it. For an instant, time seemed to stop. The wind stilled. The torches flickered. Brutus fell without a sound, his blood dark against the earth. When Antony found his body the next morning, he stood for a long while in silence. The camp was quiet, the victory hollow. "This was the noblest Roman of them all," he said at last. All the conspirators, save only he, acted out of envy of great Caesar. He, alone, in a general honest thought, and common good to all, made one of them. He ordered that Brutus be buried with honor, but in his heart, Antony knew that no words, no honors, no victories could erase what had begun that day in the Senate. The ghost of Caesar had won. In Rome, Octavian returned in triumph. The city welcomed him with garlands and torches, calling him by a new name, Augustus. He was young, calm, deliberate, the embodiment of control. The Republic was gone. In its place stood an empire. From the ashes of betrayal rose a new kind of ruler, colder, wiser, untouchable. The Senate became a shadow of its former self. The people cheered their new princeps as though nothing had ever been different. But deep beneath the marble and the gold, Rome knew what it had cost her. Freedom traded for peace, humanity for power. Years passed. Statues were raised. Temples built in Caesar's name. The world forgot the chaos and remembered only the glory. But every Ides of March, the priests would gather in silence, their faces pale beneath the torchlight. They would pour wine upon the stones of the Forum, and for a fleeting moment, the wind would shift, cold, heavy, and filled with whispers. Some swore they could hear footsteps echoing through the Senate's ruins, a faint voice speaking from beyond time itself. "You too, my friend?" And somewhere, beyond the veil of history, the ghost of Caesar smiled, not in victory, not in vengeance, but in the quiet knowledge that Rome would never escape him. Because in killing him, they had made him eternal. The Ides of March had passed, but the shadow it cast would never fade.